I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Kyu Hyun Kim. He's a professor at the University of California, Davis. Before we begin, I'll give a brief introduction to Dr. Kim. Dr. Kim is originally a native of Seoul, and after studying at Harvard University, he began teaching at the University of California, Davis, where he's an associate professor of Japanese and Korean history. He has quite an extensive background in Japanese history and then in Korean history as well. Recently, he has been researching the colonial period in Korea. I originally first got to know Dr. Kim through his interest in Korean cinema. We've worked together in various ways in promoting Korean cinema and writing about Korean cinema. And through that time, I've gotten to know just how passionate he feels about Korean cinema, how deep an interest that he has, and also just what a nuanced understanding he has of both the art of cinema and of Korean culture and society in general. It's not uncommon for historians to write about cinema in their work, or for specialists in the field of cinema to write about films that look at history from various perspectives. But I think it is rare to find someone who has such a deep understanding in both fields, in history and in the art of cinema. So I think we're very lucky today to have this talk from Dr. Kim and to hear his perspective. So I'm looking forward very much to hearing what he has to say. So let's please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Darcy, for a wonderful introduction. I don't think I'll live up to it, but I'll try my best. And thank you for Societas Koreana and the Academy of Korean Studies for this great opportunity to actually talk about one subject that I have to find a rather special occasion to talk about history and cinema in the same way. And I wish there are more cross-pollination of different academic disciplines like this, but this would be a small way of getting to that point. And before I begin, I would like to just say that if you get only one thing out of whole talk, that would be that after this talk, go and seek out the movies that I mentioned. As I'm thoroughly committed to the Korean cinema, meaning that sometimes I feel like my job is a parasite to these great creative individuals who create these wonderful works of art, and we are just hanging around and like the ants who is sort of sucking the sweets out of the insects who are taking this out of the plants, and we are harvesting the results that they have put so much efforts and energy into it. So I'm just trying to get you interested in these various works of Korean cinema. So that would be my absolute priority here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this, and I might have to skip some contents because I tend to go on and on and on. And I want to keep the time and leave the time open for question and answers. I've been teaching in public university in the United States for 15 years, and before that I got a PhD in history and East Asian languages. So I don't have a degree in cinema, but I've always been interested in cinema and Korean cinema. And you sometimes get this questions asked from the students, especially in recent years when Korean popular culture has deeply penetrated all over the world, and it certainly is the case with California. Students on their own watch a lot of Korean TV dramas and movies and ask me questions. And one of the questions, of course, is that how accurate are these movies to history? Because I'm teaching history. And of course, I assign feature films and videos and short films, sometimes even music videos in my history courses. Because the visual media, not only the young people are more familiar with shall I say, visual language in general, but also I firmly believe that they actually convey the kind of historical truth that written words sometimes do not pay enough attention to. So I'll come back to that idea as we talk, go into more concrete examples of Korean cinema. Robert Rosenstone has written in an article in American Historical Review in which he asked the questions about, as a historian who has been involved in making both award-winning feature films, fictional films, and documentaries, what is your view about films, representation film in history in cinema medium? And he began the essay very critically, saying the historians are not happy with the way movies portray history. And then he moves on to talk about, but then again, documentaries don't do any better job. Documentaries have clear points of view. They have this, I got involved in making documentaries, and then they have rams and rams of really interesting stuff, and they all cut them all out. Because they are the filmmakers make decisions that a particular film, when they are shown, it has to tell this kind of story, but these other stories, very interesting on their own, are not relevant to the point. So then he decides, he says like, who gets to decide what is relevant or not? Obviously, viewers don't get to decide it. Filmmakers decide it. So documentaries are not necessarily more truthful to history than fictional films. Not only that, and he goes even deeper and says historians themselves, when they write histories, they tell the stories. And it's even worse when they're unconsciously telling the stories. They are saying that I'm giving you this very objective, scientific, structurally sound analysis of particular problem. But if you really read it carefully, they are telling a particular narrative. And it's not that different from a narrative written by a novelist or by a filmmaker. So that this idea that stories have to make sense and they have to tell in a linear fashion with the beginning and the middle and the end, historians buy into it, whether we like to admit it or not. So then finally, he raises the question of can we really blame filmmakers for playing it loose and fast with facts and not capturing the so-called historical truth? So we have this quotation from another philosopher that is history the same thing as the past? This is a very difficult question indeed. And history, in his definition, is no, it's not. Actually, when your film is showing, historians complain about fictional films not because they distort and add stuff that could not have happened in real life, or all of this made-up stuff, so-called made-up stuff, but because they lack. History really means that there has to be debates about what exactly happened, and why it happened, and what is the significance. If a movie is showing something that it assumes that it has happened, okay, and there are exceptions to this rule. Remember, in great works of art, there are always exceptions. Rashomon is a great exception, right? Have you seen the movie Rashomon by Kurosawa Akira? I mean, there are different stories told about what happened in the forest between that woman and the bandit and the samurai. The audience never finds out what is really happened, and we are kept in the dark. It's all subjective point of view of what happened. So there are always exceptions, but overall, we cannot have with the movies the kind of discourses that exist out of this particular work, that our written histories serve as a kind of a piece in the larger puzzle that is going on outside of this particular work. But the films don't work in that way. So then from there, then I would move on to the question of what kind of Korean films were really valuable or impressive to historians. But by historians here, of course, that means me. So, the other historians, we have very different ideas about what is a great historical film. And also what Korean films, in my opinion, I have to qualify it here, but in my opinion, about the past have truly challenged the viewers to rethink and reflect upon their shared history, Koreans' shared history. So I would like to talk a little bit about this today in this rather broad survey. But I'm going to exclude movies dealing with the post-colonial period of Korean history after 1945. I'll skip the reasons why I'm doing so, because partly because there are so many movies about Korean War and aftermath, and so we need like 2 more lectures to really properly do justice to that. But there are also reasons why I think there's a big question and controversy about what happened in 1953 is properly history in the way what happened in 1905 is. So I don't want to get into that, so let's just skip that part. So here we need to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to be very, very short, but so you can ask questions if you have questions about what happened in the old times, in the old movies. But the historical romances, which is called 사극, or period pieces, or is 시대극, that's a Korean terms for these two. They are sometimes used interchangeably, have always been very popular. So it has been big box office draws, and the one prototypical example of a great 사극 is a story of 춘향, which is a romance between this courtesan's daughter and the Yangban aristocrat's son. It's one of the most popular topics in Korean film, and it has been made about 14 times since 1923. So it was very origin of Korean cinema in colonial period. The story of 춘향 has been made. Now, from historians' point of view, interesting thing about this is that story of 춘향 is a complete fantasy. There was absolutely under no circumstances a 기생's daughter, a courtesan's daughter, could have married the Yangban's son, and the best she could hope for was be a concubine. And indeed, that in the earliest versions of the story of 춘향, that's what happens. But I think it has been consumed over the centuries. People have elevated this into this a romantic narrative that is completely fantasy, but people love it because it's fantasy, because it cannot really happen in real life. It becomes a projection of yearnings of the commoner classes. So I'll come back to this later about why the 사극 is so popular. So in the 60s, 사극 was mostly melodramas showcasing star actresses or large-scale productions focusing on the spectacular. And 70s and 80s, the 사극 was increasingly appropriated for the political purposes. They became, they began to produce movies about the great kings and generals, like King Sejong and Admiral Lee Sun-shin, who has beaten the Japanese invading forces during Hideyoshi's invasion in the 16th century, and so on. But the mainstay of the 사극 has transferred to TV, and the cinema has kind of, it became sort of no longer that much popular in cinema. But then again, this is the period in generally in decline for Korean movies in general, not just historical romances. In 2000s, there is this interesting resurgence of historical romances, and there are a lot of examples that I can cite, but the most interesting one, I think, is the TV drama 대장금. which is a monster hit TV drama. It's also known as The Jewel in the Palace for those who want to look for this in the YouTube or internet and so on. And it's, I'd like to really focus on the fact that this was written by a young woman, Kyu Hyun. And then she took this several references in the chronicles of Joseon Dynasty kings. And during the time of Jungjeong, there is this reference that Jungjeong's physician was this woman named Janggeum. And then she spun this massive 56 episode fantasy out of this. It's a fantasy, but it's also very, very historically, I mean, not I should say historically, materially, material artifacts of it is absolutely, the well-made. There's a production quality is extremely high. So the content of it is a complete fantasy. The Janggeum is this young woman who is a servant in the kitchen of the court. She is a lowly birth. She step by step goes up and eventually becomes king's physician. And in the meantime, she romances this young officer who is completely a feminist projection from today. I mean, he sacrifices his career for her success. So this, you can see that this is a wish fulfillment fantasy for young Korean women. But when you look at the production, compared to the sageuk of 1970s and 80s, they actually get all the details correct. This is Daejanggeum is set in kitchen, so it shows a huge amount of food. They did a lot of research in the food. So none of the, for example, kimchi doesn't make an appearance in Daejanggeum because even though kimchi is supposed to be, the Korean food that that's codified as a Korean food, but it's historically incorrect during this time to have a kimchi because red chili pepper was not imported at the time. So there's no kimchi in here. So all these other types of food that are actually exotic to contemporary Koreans, right? These are Korean food, but Koreans themselves don't eat this because this is made a long time ago, centuries ago. So this historical accuracy and same with the clothing, same with all these other material artifacts, they are not incompatible with this sort of contemporization of historical romances, meaning that what is happening in Daejanggeum is a contemporary story, is a wish fulfillment for young Korean girls living in today. But all these details are actually more accurate than 70s and what we used to see in 70s and 80s. Okay? So this is a poster for Song Chunyang, directed by Shin Sang-ok. In the middle says 학생 입장 환영, the student and students welcome, that probably, I don't know whether that has the cinema scope, and then it's a big color production. There was a competing color production of Chunyang's story in 1960. Shin Sang-ok won on this big competition, and then he made several more really wonderful period pieces. But they don't have. The main actress doesn't look like 16-year-old courtesan's daughter at all. None of these things, none of this realism matters in these movies, but it doesn't matter in 2000s. And this is a Jeju Island, and then you can see the location spot for Daejanggeum. So Daejanggeum was so successful and successful in entire East Asia that it's been used as a resource for attracting tourists into Korea. And this happens a lot with the K-pop and then the Korean TV dramas now. Okay. So let's move into the movies then. So I have established here what I think is this patterns of talking about making movies about sageuk, which is basically to use this historical romances as a commentary on the present. So they are really about the present day Korea, even though they are set many, many years ago or centuries years ago. Even though their details are correct. So I hope you don't get confused about this. When I'm saying they are really about today's Korea, that doesn't mean the people who are wearing gold watches or cell phones are hanging around in Joseon Dynasty period. Joseon Dynasty period look more like Joseon Dynasty period in the movies made after 2000s. However, their mentalities, their character projections, their ideas are contemporary. So we have this example of and then the director who made the big success with this strategy is Lee Jun-ik. Lee Jun-ik made a comedy in 2003, which I think is still his best film, perhaps, is Once Upon a Time in a Battlefield. This is about a Three Kingdom period in ancient Korea. This is a story that's in junior high school textbook. So everybody knows this story, that Silla eventually beat Goguryeo and Baekje Silla is in today's Gyeongsang province, and they unified Silla. Everybody knows this story. And Lee Jun-ik set the movie in this Three Kingdom period, but he made a big innovation. What was that big innovation? Instead of all this Three Kingdom period actors speaking in this archaic Korean stage, like Korean, 그렇게 하셨어, or something like that, they made them speak in contemporary dialects. So people who lived in Baekje speak in Jeolla province accent, because that's Jeolla province of today. And the people who live in Silla speak in Gyeongsang province accent today, because that's today's Gyeongsang province. So then once you do this, then it becomes uproariously funny for Koreans. You have this great Silla kings, then it's all like calcified, fossilized story of how these great kings have sacrificed their own family for the greater good of the country and so on. But when they have a conversation, they talk in this contemporary dialects. 너 지금 뭐라 그랬단가? Or something like that, right? And this gap actually becomes very funny. So it was as a strategy of comedy. It's like, think of something like what would be the good example? Mel Brooks or Monty Python, except that imagine. Well, I guess this only works for Americans too. But you set a story of Jesus in Israel, and then actually, Martin Scorsese ended up doing that. He actually made some of his characters who were ancient Israelites, and then they were speaking in the Brooklyn accent. So, and he deliberately did it to capture the Nikos Kazantzakis novel, which he realized was written in this not in ordinary Greek, but a very sort of common language, almost like dialect. And so he said he wanted to capture their flavor. I don't know whether that was successful in English or not. But think of the gap between the kind of really contemporary dialogue they are speaking and the kind of hoary, textbook ready content that they are reenacting. So he was very successful with this strategy. So he then adopted a very popular play called E, which means you, into this movie called The King and the Clown. And then King and Clown was a runaway hit. It sold 12 million ticket sales. So in Korea, any movie that has been, imagine the Korea population is what, 50 million now, 55 million. Imagine the 10 million tickets were sold. So that's a humongous hit. The play itself is very interesting because it's actually set in the times of one of Joseon Dynasty's two bad kings. This one is Yeonsan, and he is. There are two kings in Joseon Dynasty that are known as tyrants, and then of course the historians have been fighting about whether why they were pegged as tyrants as opposed to other kings and so on and so forth. But the play is actually about a group of acting troupe impersonating various Yangban upper class. So a sort of play is this neutral zone in which the actors can come out and then criticize and satirize the entire political system, and then they begin to satirize the king, and then king gets heard of them. But the interesting part about the movie Here is the poster of the Once Upon a Time in a Battlefield, and then it says the dialect 아싸라게 붙어버려. You know, that's a total contemporary dialect. There is absolutely no way that these 신라 generals or 백제 generals would have spoken this way. They might have spoken like, you know, in fact, the 신라 and 백제 languages were not like today's Korean at all. So none of the Koreans would have understood the word that they were saying, okay? But anyway, but the King and the Clown was very, very interesting because it actually, what made it really hit, I think, one of the reasons at least, important reasons, is that he employed, and this is something the 70s and 80s 사극 would never have done. He actually hired someone who looks like a woman, a young boy who looks like a woman, androgynous, an actor, Lee Jung-gi, in the role of female impersonator Kong Gil. And so, but this does not lead to serious exploration of homosexuality or sexual practice in the early modern Korea. It just becomes a kind of, again, it reflects the taste of the contemporary female audience rather than actual historical reality. Not to say the Joseon dynasty sexuality was not complex. And in fact, I think, again, in actual details, these type of performances and others shown in the movie may be closer to what was going on in the Joseon dynasty than shown in 70s and 80s. Here's a okay. All right, I'll show you a little excerpt from the movie, but this is actually from TV program, so okay. Sorry, I think that cut off. But you saw the face of the Lee Jung-gi who played it. There's actually a kiss scene between him and the king I wanted to show, and his reaction afterwards. But okay, we might come to that later. But this was still considered a comedy. So again, the gap between what actually happened at the time and then how we perceive it, and our own desire to see certain things in the cinema, and the actual history. That if there's a huge gap, then it becomes funny. So these things actually work for comedy. But when it turns to serious drama, it doesn't work as well. So when he made a movie called The Blaze of Blood, which is actually set during the Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea in 1592 to 1598, he changes around the history a lot in his previous two films, but they are okay because they are serving to make a comedy more funnier. But in this movie, he makes a serious drama, trying to make a serious point. So changing history around actually backfires. He actually tempers the actual events so much to make the point that to denounce the reign of Seonjo from a contemporary nationalist perspective, and also to draw explicit parallel between 16th century Korean and the post-democratization Korea of 2000s. So he's making a kind of political tract here. And in order to do that, there was actually a revolt in 1596 by illegitimate rebel Lee Mong-hak, and Lee Mong-hak appears as a character, but he pushes that 4 years earlier into 1592. In the movie, he basically decides to rebel against the king as the Japanese are attacking Korea. And that's really not good because in real case, in real history, his rebellion took place because of the Hideyoshi invasion, because Hideyoshi's invasion showed just how much Koreans have lost respect for the king and the court. So he thought that this would the frustration and poverty and breakdown of the social order that resulted from the invasions was the cause of his rebellion. But if you see this movie, you will get the opposite impression. You'll get the impression these rebels like Lee Mong-hak was actually true patriots, and they were right to attack and then destroy the king to protect Korea from the invading Japanese. So that's actually rigging the history to make his political point more effective. This is the movie that the in Korean title 구름을 벗어난 달처럼, which is actually based on graphic novel, but the graphic novel is more the comics, and it's actually more faithful to the actual history. So the most recent film in the interesting film 사극 is The Masquerade, which is set in the reign of 광해군, which is another unpopular king in Joseon Dynasty. And 광해군 has been subject to many revisionist interpretations in the recent years. 광해군 is the king caught between the Japanese invasion of Korea and the Manchu invasion of Korea in 17th century. I'll come to that very shortly. So Masquerade is based on this plot very familiar from movies like Ivan Reitman's Dave and Kurosawa Akira's Kagemusha. Is basically king hires an actor who looks exactly like him so that he can go off and have an affair with someone and then meanwhile he's gone, that he puts the actor impersonating him in the throne, but then he gets poisoned with opium, and then he goes unconscious. So this actor impersonating him then has to play the king for real. So this is a very familiar plot from so many historical romances. And of course the movie, as I expected, then it puts this 광해군's so-called progressive and nationalistic policies attributed to the impostor. The 광해군 is the reason that 광해군 suddenly turned around and then said fought against all this Yangban literati, who was a pro-Ming Chinese. There was a rising force of Manchu barbarians, and then the 광해군 was actually the king who wanted to play the equal distance to the rising Qing and then the declining Ming. So he was actually a progenitor of this realistic diplomat of today, and he didn't get any credit for that. He gets dethroned by this Yangban literati later, whose idea of a great civilization has always been China, and so on and so forth. So that makes sense. That he's doing that, movie is doing that, but a movie gets a lot of interesting details correct that has never been shown in 사극 before. There is a really funny, again, this is a played for laughs. There is a really funny scene in Masquerade where the actor played wonderfully by Lee Byung-hun. He's in G.I. Joe movie too, but playing ninja assassin. But anyway, Lee Byung-hun plays the impersonating 광해군, has to go to bathroom very urgently. So he thinks that by bathroom he will shut the door and then crouch and do the business, but instead he finds that he has to defecate in public in full view of about 14 women, and the women are all waiting with him to defecate so that they can take away his excrement and do the wiping and all that, and then his excrement has to be examined by specialists. Just as he has to, he cannot eat or do any. So this movie actually suggests, presents this very interesting truths about Joseon Dynasty kings, that they never had a private life. Everything they did was in public. They had no concept of privacy. You see what I mean? They didn't have a concept of individual rights. They didn't have a concept of privacy. So they could have secrecy, but other than that, everything they do, including sex, childbirth, eating, defecating, is public. This is the same with the European history, and you read that about Louis XIV and so on, before French Revolution and so on and so forth. So this is very interesting stuff. Why don't we make a movie that really shows what Joseon Dynasty kings actually lived? That's the movie I want to see. So then that makes me question, is there any 사극 that challenges this presentist interpretation of the early modern Korea, meaning that some movies that actually show the past as they are, and then kind of it may make not sense to us, but still makes us really think about what happened at the time. Here is the Masquerade with Lee Byung-hun playing Hwang Il-gun and his impersonator. This impersonation thing is fictional. Again, is the inspiration from an almost meaningless one line from the actual Hwang Il-gun's diary. But they don't actually make things up these days. They actually do find a little tiny reference somewhere that actually they use a springboard for creating fictional scenarios. So there are examples. I'm not sure whether there are any better movies, but they are more interesting for that purpose. Untold Scandal, for example, is a movie that made by Lee Jae-young, and then he transports this Pierre Cordelos de Laclos' Dangerous Liaisons to 18th century Korea. So this is something that has never happened in Korea. We all know that. But that actually, this explicit foreign origins actually allows this movie to pay fidelity to the plots and then what is the between characters. So the director then has to sit down and then figure out the equivalence of the characters of Madame Tourvel and Valmont in Korea, and they have to do it in the way that audience will look at it. That's completely fake. That's science fiction. I don't buy that for a moment. You cannot do that. So you have to make them materially realistic, but we know that they never existed in actual Korean history. So Lee Jae-young's strategy then is to create a Lee Dynasty society in which the rites and the rituals and the decorums of behavior are paramount on the outside, but beneath that, all kinds of things are going on. There is a manipulation of relationship, there are deals being made, all kinds of bodily, and there is emphasis on the bodily functions, again, which coexist with beautiful splendor. There is a wonderful scene in the Lee Mi-suk, which is an absolutely stunning actress, and she is dressed up in this beautiful hanbok, and then she goes into the palanquin, and then she said like, oh yeah, I forgot this, and then somebody passes her chamber pot. So the movie addresses that yes, these are beautiful women, that they had bodily functions. So the same way, this view of foreign powers as the stock villains to criticize, and mostly Chinese and Japanese, ancient Chinese kingdom and Japanese, to criticize domestic ruling elite is no longer the norm in Korea. In a movie called The Showdown, which was a minor movie, about basically three characters, three of them soldiers, and they are fighting in a war against the Qing China on the behest of Ming Korea. And the Qing soldiers there are not enemies really. They just show up they do fight Qing soldier in one scene, but mostly they are like a Greek chorus. They come out and comments on why are these Koreans doing this thing, So it's hardly a nationalistic statement on Korea. And this is a poster for the Untold Scandal. And of course, the eroticism was a part of the marketing for the. So Lee Mi-sun, Bae Yong-jun, who is a big star in Japan, and Chun Do-yeon, one of the greatest living actresses of Korea today, in my opinion. So finally, we come to the War of the Arrows. War of the Arrows, which deals with the Manchu invasion of Korea, which was really, I think, was the most devastating foreign invasion in Korean history. It actually the movie compresses these two invasions into one because of the fictional. So these kind of fictional changes are, I think, totally acceptable. In War of the Arrows, there is no depiction of court politics, no scenes of international diplomacy, none of these things exist. It actually is about one guy who has a protagonist is Nami. He's actually a sniper. And there is a very interesting reversal of roles between, even though Manchu soldiers are the invading army on the Korean soil, they are portrayed with all the positive qualities you associate with the soldiers. Their bravery, sense of honor, loyalty to their comrades, and patriotism. Whereas the Korean protagonist is a sniper. He goes around the mountains and then sneaks around and kills people. But he is the hero. He is defending his family, and he is going after his kidnapped sister. Another interesting thing about War of the Arrows is that it's about 2/3 of the soul of the dialogue is in Manchurian. It's not in Korean. So Korean audience watching this movie are also reading Korean subtitles. That did not prevent this movie from being a big box office hit, 8 million tickets and so sold. So what this movie does in a very interesting way, I think, is actually destabilizing this ethnocentric assumption of the 사극 genre, that this is really about foreign invaders and our good Koreans. The Koreans here are simply he has this value that cannot be contained within the textbook history we learn in the schools. Well, let me show you the scene there. I have this problem start. 왜 안 되지? 됐다. 됐어요.
오늘 기순버스 구루수와 옥사고 암천한 비요 해로도 송거의 폰지요 훈련 시간 무겁다 비싸오 어이야 그렇고 하고 이번엔 뭐 암천한 비 죽어 다른 얄마 포르고 죽기
No. All right. 아니요, 근데 됐어요. Okay. Well, anyway, what he said. The strange thing is that he said in Manchurian that dialogue. My bow is not for killing people. So, and then this fierce Manchu warrior finds that very strange, that we have ravaged your country and then you're not seeking revenge against us. So this is the War of the Arrows. Okay, so we don't have much time, so I'm going to skip some parts in the next section, which I think is in the paper. I'll come to the when it comes to the colonial period Korean history, then this bifurcation between national heroes and everyone else becomes even stronger. There is also this very important question of colonial modernity. Was Korea modernized under the Japanese rule, which is a very painful and difficult question for many Koreans. Modernization tends to be perceived as a moral good in Korea, so it could not have happened under evil Japanese. I mean, that has been the standard attitude assumed by filmmakers, not just filmmakers, everybody, until very recently. But very recently, things have changed, and I'm not gonna go into detail about these two movies. Basically, what I want to say is that same thing happened with the 사극 set in Joseon Dynasty period. If you pay more attention to the physical details and get the material reality right, then you begin to then question. 이건가? 어디서 나는 거지? 이건가? special effects.
Video, only the audio.
No, it's yeah. Well, playing havoc with me. But anyway, so we have had these movies that unquestionably portray Japanese as the evil characters, like Son of a General, which is a big hit. But they actually add to this idea. But instead of just setting Japanese colonial period and filming in some old neighborhood with a completely anachronistic pavement and so on, he actually invested money, recreated this Korea of 1930s. And and then they also hired Korean actors. They were still played by Korean actors, but they made them speak Japanese. In all the saga is set in colonial period, all of Korean actors spoke this pidgin Korean. 그랬습니다, 그랬습니다, you know. It's Japanese accented Korean, because the audience is primarily Koreans. But in these movies, they actually speak Japanese. Still Korean accented Japanese because they are mostly spoken by Korean actors, but it's a big change. So accumulation of these changes, and I'm gonna skip 2000 Lost Memories because it takes too much time. It's a movie that is set in alternatives history where the An Jung-geun has failed to assassinate Ito Hirobumi, and then therefore Korea still remains the colony of Japan in 2009. So then Korean nationalists then go back in time to correct this history. And that is very nationalist narrative. But the thing is, when you watch the movie, Chang Dong-gun, this great, the handsome Korean actor, appears speaking in Japanese. And instead of shocking Korean audience to think that, oh my God, this is terrible, the Japanese have conquered Korea, instead of that, wow, he knows how to speak Japanese too. I mean, that's the reaction Korean audience have. They are living in this metropolis, glass and plastic and slick and then there's moments that are really interesting, like this Admiral Lee Sun-shin, which is standing right there. The statue has been replaced by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Now, as a historian, I just cannot help interject here that if the really Korea was under Japanese colonial rule now, the last statue they would put it in would be Hideyoshi in there. I mean, they would try to put somebody who was beneficial for Koreans to illustrate that Japanese are benevolent rulers, I mean, so this is completely historically, wrong. But so then we now have a very interesting film, a biopic of Korea's first civilian female aviator, the Park Kyung-won, and that was total commercial failure because it was subject to this internet campaign calling the movie pro-collaborator film. There were defenses from feminist scholars and all these other people. The film is very interesting because it illustrates these choices faced by many Koreans who had to access Japanese modernity to achieve their life goals. Meaning, this was a biopic in the mold of Lawrence of Arabia, but it happens to be set in the colonial period. And obviously, in order for her to achieve this star aviator status, she had to play by the Japanese rules. So movie depicts that. So movie, instead of justifying the Japanese rule, actually shows this agonizing aspects of her choice. And this is and then it's a tragic movie because the actress who played Park Kyung-won died from cancer in a very tragic way. And this is a real Park Kyung-won, who was aviator who died during flight. I'll skip this movie. And then we finally come to two movies that I want to conclude the talk with. One is the YMCA baseball team, and it's a sports comedy. And so the two movies that I want to talk about today are actually not historical romances, to conclude the movie with. One is a sports comedy, which is about Korea's first baseball team. And this movie is interesting because it doesn't do what Lee Junik did, which is to create these gaps between the colonial period, the old times, and then today, and then importing this present perspective to the past and make it funny. The funniness actually comes from the characters having fun in the movie, and then dealing with these problems like a new thing like a baseball and the rules of baseball in the movie. So it actually subtly portrays the colonial period and this imaginary space where people could play and have fun. This is something that ordinary 사극 really never faced, that you could actually have fun playing games during Japanese colonial period. Weren't the Koreans living like animals during that time? I mean, no, it's not. I mean, Japanese colonial period is where cinema has been created, modern literature has been created, modern sports has created. Almost everything we have today came from modern colonial period. But then again, that doesn't mean that Japanese have inculcated this in Korea, as some Japanese might think. It's the Koreans adapting to the new situation and making best out of it. So there is a very funny scene in which actually Kim Hyun-suk, which is the director I really like, there is a real life incident where Min Young-hwan, who was a Gojong's official, killed himself protesting the 1905 Protectorate Treaty. And there is a scene where the protagonist, Ho Chang, has written this love letter to his girlfriend, and Min Young-hwan's suicide letter and this love letter get switched. So Min Young-hwan's relatives are actually reading this suicide letter in which he's denouncing evil Japanese, but he's actually reading this love letter this guy wrote to his girlfriend. So then he's doing this, and meanwhile he has to improvise because something is subtly wrong. He's reading this thing, and he's reading this and goes like, thief of my heart, you stole my heart, something, you stole our country, and then and thieves, and then people go like, wow, thieves. And so the movie's comedy actually comes from incongruity of what happens among the historical characters, not from our perception of. But it also subtly affects the way we see the past, because it's sort of challenging in a very underhanded way about what we think of the colonial period as this dark period where everybody's either nationalists or the traders who collaborate with the Japanese. In this movie, that's not the case whatsoever. The YMC baseball team, real YMC baseball team, and this Mafia thing, I'll have to skip that. You don't have much time. So finally, we have this film called Epitaph, which is a horror film, and again, there are no stock Japanese villains. Japanese-Korean ethnic difference never raised an issue. The film symbolically captures this deep ambivalence of the Korean colonial experience. How do you do that when you don't even introduce Japanese as bad guys? There are no Japanese bad guys in this movie. But in the end, the movie really try to tell us something about the mentality of Koreans who adapted to Japanese rule during colonial period. There's an episode in which the protagonist, who's named Jeong-nam, is also Masao in Japanese, he gets embroiled in this supernatural plot. So a beautiful woman named Aoi, young girl named Aoi, died, and then her mother, who is the chairman of the board of this hospital, this is set in the hospital, marries him spiritually to this guy. I'm gonna go to show this scene. 이거는 될까? 이거 말고. 오케이. 예. 근데 이것도 또 이거 움직이면 또. Okay, hopefully this will work. 또 왜 안 될까? Okay, so you see this the phantom marriage scene with the very the tropes of the Japanese cultural splendor, showing kimono and sliding door, plum, the cherry blossoms strewn in the air. But he finds out later that it was all in fantasy. And so I think when I interviewed the Jung directors for another occasion, he actually were trying to figure out ways to really get at the psychology of the people who lived under Japanese colonial rule and believed that this will just go on forever. That they never thought the Japanese would lose the war, the empire would lose the war, and then Korea would be liberated in 1945. And I think so this is actually getting at that kind of historical truth where they go through an experience that is actually full of glamour and beauty, but later they find out that it had this underlying corruption beneath it, which led to the death and destruction war and eventual collapse of the world they lived in. So this is, even though this is a horror film, that actually uses the language of the horror to really get at this kind of historical truth. Okay, so we don't have much time, so I'll go to the conclusion that many Sageuk still maintains this presentist perspective, attempts to inculcate ethnocentric nationalism, but the genre narratives perspective have clearly diversified in the last 15 years. Joseon Dynasty is, for example, no longer seen as an exclusive province of kings, generals, and yangban scholars, women, entertainers, and those with hybrid identities, like the one in the War of the Arrows, who throughout the almost entire movie speaks half of Manchurian language, half the time he speaks Manchurian language, is now taken seriously. So the colonial period also is a fertile imaginary space without having to morally concede the benefits of the Japanese colonialism. I mean, the moral language is the worst language to really discuss this, whether Japanese were good or evil, or Koreans were good or evil. I think what happens is that we have the Japanese modernity had the attractive points. City looked beautiful and glamorous, and I think filmmakers sometimes understand this better than historians. And then finally, what do I personally want to see in the Korean Sageuk? Having said all these things, I think I want to see the film that rejects the presentist perspective. The Sageuk which gives primacy to the time period it depicts over our own. In other words, something that we cannot read our present perspectives into the back. I mean, that is, you can very legitimately say it's completely impossible to make a historical film without presentist perspective, without from point of view somehow bleeding into it. That's true, but I still want to see filmmakers try this. That is why I titled this movie. By the way, there is a documentary called Passive Strange Country. So please find that out too. That's a wonderful documentary about Korean student movement. But make the past strange country again. Then we can truly challenge the assumptions that continue to govern and dictate how we perceive history. Okay, I'll just end it there and have some questions fielded. Thank you very much.